You think that rifle makes you a soldier, Sharma? You look like you'd get a paper cut turning the pages of a book and bleed out before you found the first aid kit. The crowd of buzz-cut recruits, all sharp angles and nervous energy, erupted in a wave of sycophantic laughter. They were sharks, smelling the first drop of blood in the water, and Drill Sergeant Evans was the one who had made the cut. He stood over her, a granite statue of institutional arrogance, his jaw set, his eyes scanning her for any flicker of weakness. He found none. Anya Sharma did not flinch. She did not raise her eyes from the M4 carbine laid out in disassembled pieces on her poncho liner. Her hands, small and seemingly delicate, moved with a serene and practiced economy, wiping a film of carbon from the bolt carrier group with a solvent-dampened patch. There was no anger in her silence, no fear, no defiance. There was only the task. The laughter died in the oppressive heat of the Fort Granite training grounds, replaced by an awkward, shuffling silence as her complete lack of reaction unnerved them more than any outburst could have. But from the observation tower 200 yards away, Colonel Reed lowered his binoculars, a deep frown creasing his brow. He wasn't looking at the sneering drill sergeant or the cackling recruits. He was looking at her hands, at the precise, almost surgical way she handled the components of her weapon. He saw the way her back remained perfectly straight, a posture not of defiance, but of ingrained, unshakable discipline. It was a stillness he hadn't seen in a basic training recruit in 30 years. It was the stillness of a predator, patiently waiting. If you believe that true strength is found not in the volume of the voice, but in the precision of the action, type competence in the comments below. For the recruits of Charlie Company, this was just another Tuesday, another day of being broken down to be built back up in the Army's image. But for Anya Sharma, it was a deliberate and calculated step into a world she had only ever viewed from its highest, most secret echelons. For Drill Sergeant Evans, it was the beginning of a lesson he didn't yet know he was enrolled in. The sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the sprawling expanse of Fort Granite, turning the air into a shimmering, breathable soup. The landscape was a monotonous palette of brown dust and faded green, punctuated by the stark geometry of barracks and training ranges. It was a place designed to strip away individuality, to sandblast the soul down to its core components of fear and resolve. And in this crucible, Drill Sergeant Evans was the master craftsman. He saw himself not as a bully, but as a necessary evil, a forge whose only purpose was to burn away the dross and reveal the steel beneath. His methods were loud, profane, and deeply personal. He believed in the power of humiliation as a tool for motivation, a way to shatter the fragile egos of civilians so they could be remolded into soldiers. In recruit Anya Sharma, he saw the perfect raw material for his brand of instruction. She was an anomaly from the moment she stepped off the bus. In a sea of bravado and nervous energy, she was an island of profound calm. She was physically unimposing, with a slender frame that seemed to disappear inside her baggy uniform and a quiet, observant gaze that missed nothing. She never volunteered, never spoke unless spoken to, and her replies were always clipped, precise, and devoid of emotion. Yes, Drill Sergeant, no, Drill Sergeant, understood, Drill Sergeant. To Evans, this silence was not strength, it was a vacuum. It was the passivity of the prey, the timidity of someone who didn't belong. He decided he would be the one to give her the final push out of the nest, to prove his own cynical worldview right. The hazing began subtly, then escalated with the rising heat of the Georgia sun. He assigned her the dirtiest jobs, the most grueling extra duties. He'd discover a microscopic speck of dust on her rifle during inspection and send her on a 2-mile run in full gear. He would stop in the middle of a drill, his shadow falling over her, and unleash a torrent of verbal abuse designed to provoke a reaction. "What's the matter, Sharma? Did your mommy not pack you a juice box today? Is this all too much for you?" He'd get inches from her face, his voice a roar that made other recruits tremble. "Look at me when I'm talking to you. Do you understand the words coming out of my mouth? Or do I need to draw you a picture book?" Through it all, her response was the same. A steady, unwavering gaze and a complete, unnerving stillness. She would absorb the verbal barrage, as if it were a foreign language she didn't understand, her focus already shifting to the next required task. Her perfection was its own form of defiance. Her bunk was always immaculate, her brass always polished to a mirror shine, her knowledge of military regulations flawless. She could disassemble and reassemble her weapon blindfolded faster than anyone in the platoon, her hands moving in a blur of practiced efficiency that was both beautiful and terrifying to watch. The other recruits, initially eager to join Evans's chorus of mockery, began to fall silent. They watched her perform endless push-ups in the thick, red mud, her form never breaking, her breathing steady and controlled. They saw her finish every run at the front of the pack, never breathless, her expression placid. They saw a discipline so absolute it seemed almost inhuman. Pity began to replace their scorn. They saw a victim, an object of the drill sergeant's obsessive cruelty. They didn't see the truth. They didn't see the years of training that had forged that discipline in crucibles Evans couldn't even imagine. They didn't understand that for Anya Sharma, this was not a trial by fire. It was a meditative cool down. She was not being broken. She was simply observing. The culmination of their 8-week journey into the heart of military indoctrination was an exercise ominously named Operation Steel Tempest. It was the final exam, a sprawling live-fire gauntlet designed to simulate the chaotic symphony of a modern battlefield. The setting was a mock village, a collection of concrete shells and plywood facades baking under the relentless sun. Known to the recruits as Little Fallujah, the air was thick with anticipation and the acrid smell of spent gunpowder from the previous platoon's run. Drill Sergeant Evans stood before Charlie Company, a swagger stick tucked under his arm, his expression a mask of grim satisfaction. He relished this day. This was where the week finally shattered, where the talkers were silenced by the overwhelming reality of noise, smoke, and pressure. His eyes scanned the nervous faces of the recruits until they landed, as they always did, on Sharma. A cruel smile played on his lips. "All right, listen up," he barked, his voice echoing off the nearby barracks. "Today, we separate the sheep from the goats. This is not a game. The targets are real, the ammunition is live, and your reactions, or lack thereof, have consequences." He paced before them, laying out the scenario. A squad-level assault on an enemy-held objective. They were to clear 3 buildings, secure a high-value target, and establish a defensive perimeter. Simple on paper, a nightmare in practice. Then came the twist Evans had been planning all week. Squad leader for this exercise is Sharma. A ripple of shock went through the platoon. Even for Evans, this seemed a bridge too far, putting the quietest, most targeted recruit in charge of their final, most dangerous test with a setup for catastrophic failure. It was not a test. It was a public execution of her perceived incompetence. The other recruits exchanged worried glances. Their survival now depended on the librarian. Evans leaned in close to Sharma, his voice a low, mocking hiss meant only for her. "Time to lead, recruit. Let's see what all that quiet thinking gets you when the world is on fire. Don't get my soldiers killed, librarian." He was baiting her, hoping for a crack in the facade, a plea, a moment of panic. He received nothing. Sharma simply met his gaze, her dark eyes clear and unreadable. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Understood, drill sergeant." Her voice was calm, a stark contrast to the thumping anxiety in the chests of her squad mates. As she moved to the line to draw ammunition, the narrative of her preparation was told not in words, but in motion. While other recruits fumbled with their gear, their hands slick with sweat, hers were a study in fluid dynamics. She seated each magazine into her tactical vest with an audible, satisfying click. She checked the seal on her gas mask, her fingers tracing the edges with the intimacy of a lover. She performed a press check on her M4, pulling the bolt back just enough to confirm a round was chambered, the metallic slide a whisper of deadly intent. Her movements were not the hesitant, blocky actions of a novice. They were a well-rehearsed ballet of lethality. Every motion stripped of inefficiency, honed by countless repetitions in places far from this sanitized training ground. She was a machine preparing for its function, a silent, deadly instrument being tuned for the coming cacophony. The squad watched her, their fear slowly being replaced by a strange, new feeling, a flicker of desperate hope. Perhaps, they thought, her silence wasn't emptiness after all. Perhaps it was a container holding something they were all about to witness. The signal flare arced across the sky, a streak of angry red against the washed-out blue, and then burst. Operation Steel Tempest had begun. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of calculated chaos. Simulated artillery explosions rocked the ground, sending plumes of dirt and smoke into the air. The relentless chatter of blank-fire machine guns erupted from prepositioned nests, creating a wall of sound designed to overwhelm the senses and induce primal fear. The recruits of Charlie Company's 3rd Squad huddled behind a low concrete wall, their training battling against the instinct to curl up and disappear. They looked to Sharma, their appointed leader, expecting to see the same terror reflected in her eyes. They saw nothing of the sort. Her gaze was analytical, her head swiveling as she absorbed the battlefield, processing data at an impossible speed. The smoke, the noise, the angles of fire, to her it was not chaos, it was a complex equation, and she was already solving for X. Then, the exercise went off script. A comms unit, fried by a power surge from the pyrotechnics, went dead. The vital link between Evans and the control tower and the squad on the ground was severed. He was now just a spectator. Simultaneously, a smoke grenade canister, improperly deployed, rolled next to a stack of dry wooden pallets, part of the village dressing. In seconds, thick, acrid black smoke began to pour out, far thicker and more toxic than the training smoke, creating a genuine fire that blocked their planned route of ingress. Panic, real and potent, began to curdle the air. A recruit named Miller started to hyperventilate, his eyes wide with terror. Davis, the squad's machine gunner, was frozen, his knuckles white on the grip of his weapon. They were falling apart. In the control tower, Evans was frantically shouting into a dead microphone, his face turning purple with impotent rage. This was not the controlled failure he had envisioned. This was a real emergency unfolding before his eyes. It was in that precise moment of breakdown that Anya Sharma came alive. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was a clear, calm, and utterly authoritative command that sliced through the bedlam like a surgeon's scalpel. "Miller, breathe. Look at me. Breathe with me." Now, she locked eyes with the panicked recruit, and her sheer composure seemed to transfer to him, steadying his ragged breaths. She then turned her attention to the rest of the squad. "Comms are down. Route 1 is compromised. We're taking Route 2. Davis, lay down suppressive fire on that second-story window, 2-second bursts. Miller, on me. We're bounding." Her words were not suggestions. They were facts. She moved before they had a chance to question, her body low to the ground, eating up the distance to the next piece of cover with a sprinter's explosive power. It was a movement so fluid, so predatory, it seemed impossible for her small frame. The squad, shocked into action by her absolute certainty, followed. They moved as she directed, a clumsy but functional unit being puppeteered by a master. She was a living, breathing, tactical computer. She pointed out targets before they even popped up, her situational awareness seeming to border on precognition. 2 targets, left window, 3rd building. Engaged, 2 shots cracked from her rifle, a perfect double tap, and the 2 steel targets, which had just appeared, snapped down instantly. She didn't stop to admire her work. She was already scanning, processing, and directing. The climax came as they approached the final building. A hostage target was placed next to a high-value enemy target, with only a sliver of the enemy visible from their angle. A classic no-win scenario designed to teach difficult judgment calls. But as they rounded the corner, a hidden machine gun nest, one Evans had forgotten was part of an older exercise scenario, activated. A stream of blanks erupted, pinning them down. They were trapped in the kill zone. Without hesitation, Sharma did the impossible. She dropped to one knee, raised her rifle, and in a single, fluid motion fired one shot. The bullet traveled 50 yards, passed through the narrow gap between the hostage and the wall, and struck the sliver of the enemy target with a loud, definitive ping. It was a shot a master sniper would be proud of, made in seconds, under extreme pressure, with a standard-issue rifle. The machine gun nest went silent, its sensor tripped by the HVT being neutralized. The exercise was over. A profound, deafening silence fell over the range, broken only by the hiss and crackle of the pallet fire. The other recruits just stared, their chests heaving, their minds struggling to reconcile the quiet, unassuming woman they had mocked with the battlefield savant who had just saved them. In the tower, Drill Sergeant Evans slowly lowered his binoculars, his mouth hanging open. The words he was looking for didn't exist. "No way," he whispered to the empty room. "That's not possible." The dust had barely settled when the rumble of a Humvee engine cut through the stunned silence. It wasn't a standard vehicle from the motor pool. It was the command vehicle, a four-door behemoth with a constellation of antennas and a two-star flag of the base commander mounted on its fender. Colonel Reed emerged from the passenger side, his movements crisp and deliberate. He strode onto the range, his polished boots kicking up small clouds of red dust, his eyes fixed on the small cluster of exhausted recruits from 3rd Squad. He walked directly past Drill Sergeant Evans, who had come down from the tower and now stood awkwardly, his face a mixture of confusion and dread. The colonel offered him no acknowledgement, not even a glance. His focus was singular. He came to a halt before the squad. They snapped to a ragged, exhausted attention, their weapons held loosely in their hands. Reed's gaze swept over them, lingering for a moment on the smoking pallets, the perfectly neutralized targets, and the general state of disarray. Then his eyes settled on Anya Sharma. She was the only one who didn't seem out of breath. She was methodically clearing her M4, ejecting the last round from the chamber, and ensuring the weapon was safe, her movements as calm and precise as they had been on the poncho liner days before. There was a long, tense pause. The colonel looked from her face to the rifle in her hands, and then back to her face. A flicker of something ancient, a memory from a long-forgotten briefing or a classified after-action report, sparked in his mind. He had seen that specific economy of motion before, that way of holding a weapon as if it were a part of the anatomy. It was the signature of a very small, very elite community. He turned to his aide, a young captain who had jogged to keep up with him. "Captain, give me the service record for recruit Sharma, Anya. Not the basic training intake file. I want her full 201 file. Expedited. I want it on my tablet in 2 minutes." The captain, sensing the urgency and gravity in his commander's tone, nodded sharply. "Yes, sir." He pulled out his own encrypted device and began tapping furiously. While they waited, Colonel Reed continued to study Sharma. He wasn't looking at a recruit anymore. He was looking for confirmation. He saw the slight cant of her head as she listened to the distant sounds of the base, the way her eyes never stopped scanning her sector, even though the exercise was over. These weren't the habits of a trainee. They were the ingrained instincts of a survivor, a veteran of places far more dangerous than Fort Granite. The captain's tablet chimed. "Sir, I have it." "It's heavily redacted, sir. Most of it is above my clearance level." Reed took the tablet without a word. His eyes scanned the first page, his expression shifting from stern curiosity to disbelief, and then, finally, to a look of profound, almost reverent respect. He stood up straighter, his own posture unconsciously mirroring the ramrod discipline he saw before him. The recruits and Drill Sergeant Evans watched in baffled silence, unable to comprehend the silent drama unfolding. They couldn't see the screen. They couldn't see the words that were rearranging Colonel Reed's entire understanding of the situation. They couldn't see the lines of text that painted a portrait of a warrior who had been living among them in plain sight. The screen of the tablet glowed in the harsh sunlight, illuminating a history so extraordinary it felt like a work of fiction. The narrator's voice filled the space, articulating the silent data that Colonel Reed was absorbing with wide-eyed awe. Name: Sharma, Anya. Rank: the file showed her enlisted rank as Sergeant First Class, But Reed knew this was a placeholder, a cover for entry. Her true rank was likely commissioned, and far higher. Previous service, United States Army Special Operations Command. Unit designation, Task Force 11, Echo Squadron. The name alone sent a jolt through the colonel. Task Force 11 was a ghost unit, a Tier 1 counterterrorism and special mission element whose existence was only whispered about in the highest echelons of the Pentagon. They were the tip of the spear's tip, the people sent in when all other options had failed. Operational deployments, 14. The locations were blacked out, redacted blocks of ink that spoke to a world of shadow wars and clandestine operations. Combat hours, estimated over 3,000. A staggering number, more than most career infantrymen saw in 30 years. Specializations, a long list followed. Advanced hostage rescue, high-threat environment close protection, special reconnaissance, advanced breaching, and, at the top of the list, the operator training course, a grueling selection process with a 90% attrition rate, which she had not only passed, but had graduated with honors. Medals and commendations, the list was breathtaking. A Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor, for actions in a redacted location. 3 Silver Stars. 4 Bronze Stars with V for Valor. A Purple Heart. The screen was a constellation of heroism. Colonel Reed slowly looked up from the tablet, his face pale. He looked at the small, quiet woman standing before him, her uniform smudged with dirt and sweat, and he saw her for the first time. He saw not a recruit, but a legend. A quiet professional who had walked through hell and back, countless times, without fanfare or recognition. In that moment, in front of the entire stunned platoon and a shell-shocked drill Sergeant Evans, Colonel Reed, a 2-star general with 35 years of service, did something no one had ever seen him do for a recruit. He drew himself to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed the sharpest, most formal salute of his career. The snap of his hand hitting the brim of his patrol cap was like a gunshot in the sudden silence. His voice, when he spoke, was thick with an emotion that was part apology, part awe. "Ma'am," he said, the word hanging in the air, imbued with a weight of respect that stunned the onlookers. "Sergeant Sharma, my deepest apologies. Your presence here was not properly communicated down the chain of command. We were not aware the shockwave of that single word, ma'am, and that crisp salute radiated outwards." The recruits' jaws hung open. They looked at Sharma, then at the general, then back at Sharma, their brains short-circuiting. Drill Sergeant Evans felt the blood drain from his face. The foundation of his world, built on the bedrock of his own perceived experience and authority, had just been pulverized. The librarian, the weak link, the woman he had spent weeks tormenting and humiliating, was not just a soldier. She was a warrior of a caliber he had only read about in books, a decorated hero who outranked him not just in deed, but likely in actual authority. He had not been forging a soldier. He had been trying to bully a living legend. The irony was so profound, so crushing, it stole the air from his lungs. He finally understood the silence. It wasn't weakness. It was patience. It was the calm of the hurricane's eye. The story spread through Fort Granite not like wildfire, but like a shockwave from a detonation. It started on the range, with the whispers of Charlie Company's 3rd Squad. It was carried back to the barracks on trembling voices, then leaped to the mess hall, where it jumped from table to table, each telling adding a new layer of mythic detail. By nightfall, every drill sergeant on the base had heard it. By the next morning, it was being discussed in hushed tones in the officers' club and the command headquarters. The legend of the librarian of Fort Granite was born. The narrative took on a life of its own. The impossible shot became a ricochet off 3 walls. The single-handed takedown of the exercise became a tale of her disarming multiple opponents with her bare hands. The truth was remarkable enough, but the legend was irresistible. It served a deeper purpose. It was a modern military fable, a cautionary tale about the mortal sin of assumption. For Drill Sergeant Evans, the aftermath was a period of profound and agonizing self-reflection. He wasn't officially reprimanded. Colonel Reed understood that a public dressing down would be less effective than the private humiliation Evans was already enduring. The colonel had simply looked at him after dismissing the platoon and said, "Reevaluate your assessment criteria, Sergeant." The quiet disappointment in the general's voice was more damning than any shout. Evans spent that night in his office, the door closed, replaying every interaction he'd had with Sharma. Every insult, every sneer, every punishment he'd doled out now seemed like the ignorant posturing of a child poking a sleeping lion with a stick. He saw her silence not as fear, but as profound restraint. He saw her methodical perfection not as obsessive-compulsive behavior, but as the bedrock of elite professionalism. His arrogance, which he had always mistaken for strength, was revealed for what it was, a brittle shield for his own insecurities. The next day, he found her after morning formation. He approached her not as a drill sergeant to a recruit, but as a man confronting a truth he could no longer deny. He stood before her, stripped of his bluster, his voice quiet and hoarse. "Sharma, Sergeant." He corrected himself, the word feeling foreign and inadequate. There's no excuse. I was wrong. About everything. I apologize." He expected a lecture, a quiet, "I told you so," or even a dismissal. He received none of it. Anya Sharma simply looked at him, her expression as placid as ever, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We all have a job to do, Drill Sergeant," she said. And in that simple, forgiving statement, she gave him a path forward. She taught him a lesson more profound than any he had ever taught his recruits. That true authority is not taken, it is granted, and it is earned through respect, not fear. Anya Sharma's status within Charlie Company transformed overnight. The recruits no longer saw her with pity or suspicion, but with a wide-eyed, reverential awe. They kept their distance at first, as if she were a museum piece, something to be admired from afar. But her own unchanging demeanor slowly broke down that barrier. She remained the same quiet, methodical individual. She never spoke of her past, never acknowledged the legend growing around her. She simply continued with the business of being a trainee, performing every task with the same unwavering focus as before. Her quiet competence, however, was now seen in a new light. It became the new standard. Recruits started watching her every move, not to find fault, but to learn. They saw the way she maintained her equipment, the discipline of her physical training, the calm she projected under pressure. They began to emulate her. The quality of the entire platoon started to rise, lifted by the silent example of one person. She began to mentor them, not with speeches or lectures, but through small, subtle actions. She would see a recruit struggling to zero his rifle and would silently approach, gently adjust his grip, and tap his shoulder to remind him to control his breathing. She would notice a squad fumbling with a room-clearing drill and would, with a few hand signals and repositionings, show them how to move with efficiency and safety. She never used her past as a cudgel. She didn't teach them the advanced tactics of Tier 1 operators. She taught them the absolute mastery of the fundamentals. She showed them that excellence was not about flashy moves, but about doing the simple things perfectly every single time. Drill Sergeant Evans, too, became her unwilling student. He started watching her, learning from her. He saw how she led not through volume, but through clarity, how she inspired not through intimidation, but through undeniable competence. His own instructional style began to change. The pointless cruelty vanished, replaced by a demanding but fair rigor. He stopped trying to break recruits and started trying to build them, understanding now that the steel was already inside them. His job was simply to help them find it. He and Sharma developed a strange, unspoken professional relationship. He would give an order, and she would execute it perfectly, her performance a silent lesson for everyone watching. In a profound irony, the recruit he had tried to drive out of the army became the single greatest training asset he had ever had. She was a living embodiment of the ethos he had only ever paid lip service to. The lesson rippled outwards from third squad, changing the culture of the training environment. The story of Anya Sharma became a powerful tool for instructors to dismantle the prejudices and assumptions of new recruits, a constant reminder that the person standing next to them, regardless of their size, gender, or demeanor, could be a giant. Her presence at Fort Granite was a quiet revolution, proving that a single example of true professionalism could be more transformative than 1,000 pages of doctrine. A year later, the Georgia sun beat down on a new cycle of recruits standing on the same dusty ground. They were the fresh-faced, nervous raw material that the Army perpetually consumed and remolded. Standing before them was Drill Sergeant Evans. He was a different man. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, confident authority. The sneer had been replaced by a watchful, discerning eye. He still had a voice that could peel paint, but he used it to instruct, not to demean. As he prepared them for their final exercise on the newly refurbished live-fire range, he paused, his gaze sweeping over their anxious faces. "Before we begin," he said, his voice dropping to a more conversational tone, "I'm going to tell you a story. It's about a recruit who stood right where you're standing now. She was small, quiet. By all outward appearances, she was the last person you'd pick for a fight." He proceeded to tell them the story of Anya Sharma. He told it without embellishment, sticking to the facts, which were powerful enough on their own. He told them about his own ignorance, his own prejudice. He was brutally honest about his failure in judgment. "I looked at her," he said, his voice raw with the memory, "and I saw what I wanted to see. I saw a librarian. I didn't see one of the most decorated warriors this army has produced in a generation." He pointed to the range, to the final building in the mock village. "That last target run, the one with the hostage shot, we call that Sharma's run now. It's a reminder. It's a lesson. Look around you. Look at the person to your left, to your right. You have no idea who they are, where they've been, or what they're capable of. Your assumptions are not your weapon. They are your enemy. They will get you killed faster than any bullet. Your job is to see the soldier, not the package they come in. Do you understand me?" A chorus of "Yes, Drill Sergeant," thundered back, but it was different this time. It was filled with a new understanding, a new respect for the quiet potential that might be standing right beside them. The legacy of Anya Sharma was not a plaque on a wall or a name in a history book. It was a living, breathing part of the institution's culture. It was a story told by a humble drill sergeant to a new generation of soldiers, a lesson in humility passed down as doctrine. As for Anya, she had completed the basic training cycle, graduating quietly and without ceremony. She had accomplished her mission. Years spent in the sterile, high-tech world of special operations had left her feeling disconnected from the institution she served. A promise to a fallen friend, a young ranger who had always talked about the formative power of his time at Fort Granite, had brought her here. She wanted to walk where he had walked, to understand the foundation upon which soldiers like him were built. Having reconnected with that fundamental truth of service, she had disappeared back into the classified world she called home, her file once again sealed, her presence at Fort Granite officially just a clerical anomaly. But her silence, her competence, her legacy, they remained, echoing in the stories of the soldiers who were now better for her having been there. True strength is not a performance. It does not announce its arrival with trumpets or demand attention with a roar. It is quiet. It is methodical. It is the calm, steady hand in the midst of chaos, the clear voice that cuts through the noise of panic. It is the silent accumulation of thousands of hours of practice, of discipline honed in crucibles unseen and unspoken. Arrogance is a hollow armor, loud and brittle, designed to conceal the fear of being tested. It builds its fortress on the shifting sands of assumption, judging the world by its superficial shell, blind to the substance within. Competence, however, needs no such defense. Its validation comes not from the applause of others, but from the successful completion of the task. Its confidence is forged in the fires of experience, a deep, unshakable knowledge of its own capabilities. Anya Sharma was more than a soldier. She was a principle made manifest. She was a living lesson that the content of one's character and the depth of one's skill are invisible to the eye that seeks only to confirm its own prejudice. The story of her time at Fort Granite became more than just a piece of military folklore. It became a parable for a timeless truth, that respect is a currency earned through action, not demanded by rank or volume. It is a quiet exchange between those who know and those who are willing to see. The legacy she left behind was not in the memory of her impossible shot, but in the institutional shift she inspired. It was in the drill sergeant who learned to see potential instead of weakness, in the recruits who learned to value substance over style, and in the enduring idea that the most formidable person in the room is often the one you notice last. True legacy is not what you achieve for yourself. It is what is carried forward in the actions and beliefs of others, a silent, powerful current that continues to shape the world long after you are gone. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where a person's actions define their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.